Greg, great to have you in the studio. Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas. Matthew Bryza is also with us. Greg, what was it like in Washington?
God, really great time. Just an electric energy right now in Washington. You had, so many people converging on the city for the inauguration, and real economic optimism too. There's, big business community that sort of piled on Washington. So it wasn't just politicians and real political junkies. It was just good business people from around the country. So, there's just a really great amount of optimism right now.
Matthew Bryza, I wonder what you make of what Trump has done over the last couple of weeks. He's taken some risks as well as rewarding some of his backers and doing many of the things that he promised to do, certainly in his campaign. Do you think this tariffs that he's threatening to impose on Canada, China and Mexico, do you think that's a good policy? Do you think that will work?
Well, it's debated, right, heavily. What is the impact of tariffs? Is it inflationary, or do adjustments happen in the economy once tariffs are imposed that reduce the inflationary impact of tariffs? But there is a contradiction, right? I mean, kind of conventional economic theory is that tariffs will increase prices. That means boost inflation, which is contradictory to one of President Trump's fundamental goals. Although he has said lately that fighting inflation is now a secondary objective, and securing the U.S. southern border, or both borders, is a primary objective. But having said that, I mean, it's a radical departure from traditional U.S. foreign policy, not only in terms of favoring free trade, but in imposing tariffs on your neighbors that are among the biggest trading partners with whom the U.S. has a free trade agreement, not to mention European allies. So it's very risky geopolitically and economically, but he's confident it's going to have an impact that benefits the U.S.
Greg, what do you think? You're nodding along to a lot of what Matthew was saying there. There's a lot of sense spoken there.
Yeah, Matthew has some good points. I mean, especially on the Republican side, it's been, traditionally the party of free trade, and tariffs and sort of, more nationalist economic policies was more associated with the Democrats. But like a lot of things, everything's changed. And, President Trump is provocative. I think he's actually used tariffs quite wisely as a bargaining chip, and it's worked already. It worked with Mexico back in his first term with the Remain in Mexico policy on illegal migrants, and then you saw him use it against the threat of tariffs against the president of Colombia last week when he declined to accept the return of his illegal migrants into Colombia. So, it's unpredictable, and markets typically they don't like unpredictable, they like certainty, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is new, but there's a lot of things that are new about President Trump, and even versus his first term. So I don't...
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it took perhaps a little while to get going in the first term, but he knows this now. He knows what he's doing. And really, as we saw from all those executive orders on day one, there's so much that he's done already. He's done probably more than Biden did in the last year.
Absolutely. That's not saying much. But but I think, and the things that Biden did accomplish were quite destructive to the country. Notably the big spending bills, the Save America plan or act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So, look, he's hit the ground running. It's a great point, Peter. He had more time to prepare. Essentially, he's had 4 years to prepare for this, and so he's really hit the ground running. It's great to see, and again, I think the optimism just comes through from all his actions. One
of the big challenges, Matthew, certainly in the last few days, has been the response to this horrendous helicopter and plane, the passenger plane crash. It was interesting. We saw a little bit of the press conference on Drive I was presenting on Thursday, and he said that he was obviously consoling people and saying that he and Melania and obviously 340 million Americans were thinking about the people who had died. But he also said that he talked about diversity, equity and inclusion, and said that could perhaps have been part of this. I wonder how that has gone down, Matthew, and what you think about the fact that this was raised.
Yeah, it's sort of, I know, it's kind of tempering the optimism that's really out there that Greg was talking about, especially in the business community. I mean, it's considered across the board, regardless of your political affiliation, wise to withhold any speculation about the cause of a tragedy like this until the experts investigate. And so, the investigation is just beginning. It's going to be conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, part of the Federal Aviation Administration. And yeah, it's unprecedented in my experience that a president would speculate on any of the causes before having a sense of what it may be. And there hasn't been any, by his own admission, by President Trump's own admission, there hasn't been any evidence that DEI was involved. I mean, he said in the Oval Office yesterday or the day before, when asked point blank by a reporter, "Do you have evidence of that?" He said, "No, but it's essentially said it's possible that DEI was involved." So his actions have been incredible, as Greg was saying. He's done more, and as you were saying, Peter, in these 2 weeks than so much of the Biden administration. But these sorts of shoot from the hip kind of emotional outbursts, I think, are going to hurt him in the longer run.
Do you think they'll hurt him in the longer run? We've had the American Association of People with Disabilities saying that Trump's comments were irresponsible, disparaging and wrong.
No, I don't agree with that at all. In fact, before the crash, January 22nd, I believe, one of his executive actions was to remove DEI from selection criteria in the federal aviation, whatever it's called, the
authority.
Yeah, thank you. But also specifically for air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
And during the Obama years, there were 1,000 candidates, and out of the 1,000, 900 ended up doing a class action lawsuit that were removed from their candidacy because there wasn't, in terms of the administration's view, enough diversity.
Right.
And it's something in public safety like that. It's really important to keep that away. Mm-hmm. So it's been a big theme of President Trump outside of the whole of the news from Washington on the crash. So I'm not sure it will hurt him in the long run. He is provocative. He likes to, as Matthew said, shoot from the hip. That's just his nature. People were really uncomfortable with that in 2015 and 16. I think most of us get it now, and that's just the way he is, and it's refreshing. It's unfiltered, and that's often quite refreshing.
Matthew, we heard from Pete Hesketh, we heard from J.D. Vance as well. This is clearly not just all about Donald Trump. There's a collective nature to this presidency. Do you think that will continue? And I wonder what you make of the rule of Elon Musk so far.
I definitely think it will continue. The Republican Party is the party of Donald J. Trump. And whereas he was not, I don't think he was expecting to win in the election previously in 2016, this time you guys were saying he is totally ready. He had a plan, coming into, formulation that he's implementing now. And he is the boss. So Pete Hegseth and everybody else, they're taking orders from him. And they're going to, if they want to keep their jobs, they're going to have to keep on doing that.
What do you make, Greg, of this sort of international aspect of it, especially in regard to the EU and these tariffs? I mean, we've heard about Canada, Mexico and China, certainly, but specifically the EU and perhaps Britain as well. How do you see this developing as time goes on?
Yeah, I think it will be perhaps not as bad as the critics think. And you notice that in his inauguration speech, he really dialed it down. He was very firm on a lot of the policies that he's been telegraphing for months, during the campaign and the transition. That was the one area where he alluded to it, but I think he was using it again more as a bargaining chip, and I think that's what we can expect to see. 30% of Mexico, in terms of exports, from Mexico, that's 30% of their GDP. For Canada, it's just over 20% of their GDP. For America, with those two countries, it's less than 1% of GDP. So that's a strength that he has, and it's a tool he can use. Again, it worked in his first term with Mexico, and this fentanyl problem, this sex trafficking across the border, especially the Mexican border, but some of which comes from the Canadian border. These are really big issues. So I think so much of what he's doing, whether it's tariffs or any other policy, is going to be around the illegal migrant crisis.
And that certainly is the priority, Matthew Bryza, isn't it? And I wonder what you see happening next and all of that.
Well, it's definitely the priority, and as I said a few moments ago, he kind of recalibrated his post-election message to say it's more important to secure the southern border and northern border than to bring down prices. So, I mean, he's already beginning to implement with a big splash the policy of rounding up illegal or undocumented migrants. I think there's going to be a struggle, though, in terms of funding, and so that's a political struggle in the Congress, right? Because the money and the personnel and the facilities don't exist to reach the higher end of the objectives in terms of deporting undocumented immigrants. We just don't have enough detention spaces. They're talking about building 40,000 new beds, but then you need, the money for the transportation and for the personnel from ICE to carry out these actions. So there will be a battle in the Congress, and there are, real budgetary hawks in Trump's own Republican Party who are really worried about excessive spending and the national debt. So it just, as a practical, even logistical matter, remains to be seen how close Trump is going to get to the 2 million or even the 11 million he talked about undocumented migrants or immigrants that are in the United States being deported.
And those battles ahead with Congress will certainly loom large, won't they, Greg?
Absolutely. I think now the hard work starts, right? Executive orders are easy.
Yeah.
And the staffers, were very well prepared, and I think the president was well prepared. Congress is going to be difficult. The Republicans don't have a slim majority, so if there's any pushback from even a handful of, 4 or 5, that can really threaten, the ability of the president to get his agenda completed. So, and I think, and Matthew brings up a good point, I think there's a lot of congressmen that are worried about spending. The capacity for deportations last week was only 400,000. With some more resources, they can get that up to 600,000. So that's why we're starting, that you hear the term the worst first.
Yeah.
It's really, mostly
and
violent
it's a process,
criminals.
Isn't it?
Yeah. It takes some time, but I think, and if it's communicated properly, people will understand that keeping the illegal migrants can be as expensive as deporting them, because they're being housed, much like here, they're being housed, they're given mobile phones and debit cards, and it's really expensive, and it's really wrecking cities like New York and Chicago, where I'm from. So I think voters will understand that it's going to be costly.